sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I is trembling. We both know who wins. We both know who wins this fight. Oh, death, you have lost your sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I is trembling. We both know. Come on, let's sing that out tonight. Oh, death, you have lost your sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I am trembling. We both know who wins. Shout it out, shout it out. Oh, death, you have lost your sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I am trembling. We both know who wins. We both know who wins this fight. Oh, death, you have lost your sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I am trembling. We both know who wins. We both know who wins this fight. Oh, death, you have lost your sting. Oh, grave, you have met my king. Oh, fear, I am trembling. We both know who wins. We both know that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
How about those conversations you can continue on over morning tea afterwards? I wanted to talk to you this morning about serving God in and through the church, and to do it in the way that God has particularly and specifically shaped you to be able to do so. And you might think, well, you're a pastor, so of course you want to talk about getting people to volunteer in the church. And while there might be elements of truth to that, I'm not your pastor. And so I've got no vested interest in increasing, volunteerism in this place. But while I'm not your pastor, I am a pastor. And I'm convinced that you as individuals and as a church will thrive and grow in your faith as you follow Jesus into service. And so my hope is that this time this morning will equip you with insight and perspective to help you know where and how you can best serve God, His people, and even the world. But before we get into that, it was my birthday just the other week. And one of the family traditions that we do on a birthday is that as we sit around the dinner table, we go around and we share what it is that we love and appreciate about the person whose birthday it was. And the thing that one of my sons shared was that he loves that I share memes with others, that I'm always texting memes to people. It's the idea of seeing a meme and thinking of someone specific to share it with. And so in keeping with that, I want to start this morning with a meme. And so we have here, hopefully you can see that there's a dog who, though he can walk and run, wishes that he could fly. We have a fish who can swim but wishes it could walk. There's a bird who can fly through the sky but wishes that it could swim. And then you have, if I go the right way, then you have the duck who just looks smug that he can do all three. And when it comes to the issue of serving God in and through the church, we often feel like those first three animals. God has given us amazing gifts and abilities, but instead of celebrating them, we look at someone else and we wish that we could be like them. My best mate is an amazing musician, songwriter, worship leader. And I'll watch him as he leads worship, and I'm just in awe of just how effortlessly it comes to him. He'll be playing and singing and tapping a tambourine and, I don't know, doing something else as well. And it's easy for him. And then I look at myself, and while I know my ability, I'm also well aware of my limitations as a musician and singer and leader. And in doing that, in looking between him and myself, I tend to deny and discount what I can do. And when we look at the scriptures, when we look at our own lives, we see that God has given us particular gifts and abilities and experiences and such that shape us for service. And yet, we want to be the duck, whatever the duck looks like for you. So I want to say to you at the outset, as you consider our shape for service and where we are to serve, this is not at all about comparing ourselves with someone else or wishing that we were someone else. It's not about wishing that we were a duck or thinking that if we're not a duck, then we're not anything. Rather, it's about recognizing the gifts and the abilities that you do have and figuring out then the best environment in which to use them. So I want to say at the outset, no comparisons. And if you've got the handout, that's the first line there. You are who and how God shaped you to be. So don't worry about the duck. No comparison. Stop looking at the duck. I also want to say, before diving in, that we can easily become so focused on finding, the right place for us to serve, the way that fits the way that God has made us, that we can end up not serving at all. And it sounds so spiritual for us to decline to serve morning tea or to greet people at the door because, that's not how God's gifted me. My gifts lie elsewhere. It sounds good and it even sounds potentially godly until, that is, you don't do anything. And you just leave the body of Christ suffering because you haven't found the one and only right place for you to serve in. But Jesus said that even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. He also says that whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. So in other words, core to our life as a Christian is being a servant of others. And the specifics are somewhat irrelevant. We're called to serve. And in fact, service means all the more when it's outside of the place of our gifting or our role. At our church, we used to have supper every week after the evening service. And I remember one night I was preaching, and because that was my official role and responsibility. But then I noticed that no one was in the kitchen to clean up the supper stuff. And so though I had already served, and though my role is typically up front and public and all the rest, there was a need to clean up in the kitchen. So that's what I did. Maybe your church here, like mine, is desperate for help in its kids ministry. Maybe no one's offering a welcome to people as they come in the door. Maybe there's a lot of people who can no longer drive and need to be picked up in order to get to church. Maybe your church's small group is crying out for Bible study leaders. Find out where is there a need and maybe step into that. Be willing to serve wherever it might be. And maybe where the need is not the place of your gifting, not the place of what you feel particularly called to. Maybe you are the duck and you're being asked to just be a fish. But the way that we earn our way to such a role is by forming and displaying our character by serving the church wherever it needs it, and to do that first. So all that said, let's consider how God has shaped us for service. The S of our shape stands for our spiritual gifts. Paul writes to the Corinthian church that there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord behind them. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. In other words, Paul is simply saying that God, Father, Son, and Spirit, has given gifts to his people. They're all kinds of different gifts for all kinds of different purposes, but in and through them all, in all their variety, God works. And then Paul goes on to say this, that to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. And there's two important things to note here in this verse. First is that these gifts of the Spirit are given to each one. That is to say, everyone who is a Christian has a gift from God. There's no exceptions. No matter what you feel like, you are not the one single person in all of history that God has overlooked. You have a spiritual gift. And that's true whether you're in your 80s or whether you're 8. If you have faith in Jesus, then God has given to each one of you a spiritual gift. And secondly, though, the other thing that this verse says is that these gifts that we've received, they are not for us to be awesome. They are for us to serve the common good of the church and of the world. We might have a gift, for instance, of administration. And the reality is, that's not, it's not the gift that you want to, that people, are excited about having, unless they've got it, because then they love it. But typically, administration, that's not the thing that they write books and they go on tour giving, keynote messages at conferences and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, if you've got the gift of administration, chances are your life and your home is well organized. But if that's all that we do with it, then we're failing to fulfill God's purpose in giving us that gift. That gift has been given to us to serve others. By helping, your enthusiastic but unstructured kids ministry leader to plan for the term. It's been given to help write and distribute rosters for the music team. It's been given to help clean up the church storeroom and bring some order to the chaos there. Our gifts are given to each of us, not for our sake, but for the good of everyone else. So that said, what are then the gifts? There's a number of places where spiritual gifts are listed, and I've included some of them in your handout. Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and 1 Peter 4. And when you look at the various lists, you'll see that they're not the same. Some things are on most or every list, other things only get mentioned once. And that seems to say that when we look in the scriptures at the list of gifts, that they're indicative, that they suggest the types of gifts that God gives without limiting them only to these gifts. But at the end of the day, though, the big question you probably have is, how do I know what my gift is? I mean, sure, yes, Matt, I understand the scriptures talk about them. Yes, I've got one, whatever. But how do I know what it is? It's not as tangible as being able to take the paper off and open it up and see. So let me give you 3 pointers to help you discern what gifts God has given you. The first way to figure out your gift is, surprise, surprise, by serving. Here's the hot tip. You won't figure out how God has gifted you if you don't do anything. You might have amazing gifts of compassion and mercy, but you'll never know that if you don't talk to people. You might be an amazing leader, but you'll never know that if you don't do more than just sitting in a pew on a Sunday. You might be an incredible Bible teacher, but you'll never know that unless you try leading a discussion at youth group. So if you want to know what your gift is, simply start serving. And then, secondly, pay attention to the feedback that you receive from others. What do you do that gets affirmed? And what do you do that people suggest maybe you should not do anymore? I mean, the classic example of this is something like Australian Idol and the auditions there. There are people who audition for Australian Idol who have amazing talent. And then there are people who really needed someone to pull them aside beforehand and to tell them that you cannot sing at all. So pay attention to the feedback that you receive. It will be an indicator to you of where your gift is. And the third pointer, it's a bit harder to identify, but as you serve, pay attention to the things that come easily and natural to you. These might be the things where someone gives you feedback and it seems actually quite excessive to you. Maybe you organised a church picnic, maybe it was a camping trip, maybe it was a women's event, whatever it was. To you, it just seemed the simplest, easiest thing for you to do. It just made sense that you would do this and then that and then those things. It was really clear to you what people would need to be involved, what resources you'd need, and all the other elements that would happen. And then when the event actually came along, everything ran smoothly and you were able to quickly and easily troubleshoot the issues that came up. And to you, this all just seems so easy and natural. You hardly break a sweat about it. And to you, you think, well, anyone could do this. Until you watch someone else try and do it. And they try and do the same thing, and they are all over the place. Things aren't organized. There's no clarity about what's happening or who's responsible for it. No one knows about it to turn up in the first place. And then this person just, the smallest issue pops up and they just fall apart. Throughout the whole experience, they're stressed, overwhelmed, and they're feeling out of their depth. Here then is a real hint of where your gifts are. And in this instance, maybe your gifts are leadership and administration. The challenge is, because it just comes so naturally and easily to you, you can tend to discount it and just think nothing of it. Yeah, anyone could have done that. But as we've seen, in actual fact, not anyone could do what you do. If we go back to the meme that we started with, for a fish, swimming is the most natural thing in the world. It doesn't think anything of it. But a bird couldn't do it. So pay attention to the things that feel really even ordinary and natural for you that other people seem to have a real struggle with. Not this morning right now, unless you get bored with me and you want to do it yourself, but there's space on your handouts at another time for you to sit with the question of what are or what might be your spiritual gifts and to fill them in. But we'll move on, because the next aspect for our shape for serving is our heart. This is about the things that you're passionate about. And this starts to give then more direction about where you serve. If our gifts maybe are how we serve, our heart directs us to where. For instance, you might have a gift of teaching the Bible and you have a heart for kids. It would make sense then that rather than leading a Bible study at the retirement village, that you get involved in kids ministry. Serving where your heart is will help you to stay committed and energized and make your service feel meaningful to you. Some of you, what you're passionate about will be super clear. You barely have to scratch the surface in conversation, and you are there. You're on topic, and you're at your point of passion. You know that God has placed this people group, this cause, this dream on your heart. But others of you may have no idea what you're passionate about. Whether it's because of your personality or your experiences in your upbringing or whatever else, when someone asks you about the things that God has placed on your heart, you have no idea where to start. And you can barely figure out what you want for breakfast, let alone to know what your place of passion is. And I want to say then, don't stress it if that's you. Because as you serve, things will become clearer. There will be things that you realize you have zero interest in. And that's not a judgment on those things or a judgment on you. It's not a flaw in your character. It's just how you're shaped. And so you recognize that and you try something else. And along the way, you might discover the thing that you can barely stop thinking about. Other way to come at this issue of our heart is by asking some questions, and they're on their handout. What situations make you angry? Or what energizes and excites you? What's important to you? What do you love doing? If you get into a conversation with someone, what topic could you talk about non-stop? So again, as you sit with these kind of questions and reflect, there's space for you to begin listing the things that you are passionate about as you consider how God has shaped you. Then the next one pretty much speaks for itself. What abilities and talents and skills do you have? Now, these aren't anything supernatural necessarily, but they're just things that you've developed and worked on and been educated in and trained in. What can you do well? It might be cooking, sports, or music. It might be computer skills, graphic design, dance. It might be emotional intelligence, research, making phone calls. It might be first aid training, being a good listener, or handyman skills. The list is pretty endless. In the church, we can kind of default to giving priority to our spiritual gifts. After all, they're the ones that God has given us. But we actually have a whole lot of natural and developed abilities that are just as much a gift from God that we can use for Him. It doesn't necessarily take a spiritual gift to set up a potluck lunch, but you might have an ability to manage that easier than the person next to you. I don't think that's the kind of thing that I could handle the stress of. I certainly am not the go-to person to repair a broken door, but I can play music, and I can synthesize a whole lot of information, and I can cook a mean pork roast. And so what are the things that you can do? And how might then they lead you to be able to offer them to the church. So, as we consider how God has shaped us to serve, we've looked at our spiritual gifts, our heart, our abilities, and personality is then absolutely a part of our shape of where and how we serve. When I was doing my theological studies, my thesis topic that I researched was about being an introvert in ministry. Because ministry is a very people-y job, and yet I'm an introverted person who is drained by too much people-y stuff. And so it's not that having a particular personality type prohibits you from serving in various ways. It's that we need to be aware of it and aware of its impact. So something like this pie chart accurately represents me. Things that I'd rather do than make a phone call, rather be eaten by a dinosaur that shows no mercy. That's the only option in the chart. I am more than happy to catch up with someone, but I have a real difficulty making the phone call to arrange the catch up. My wife Marin and I have worked out how to play to our personalities when it comes to having guests to our house for a meal. Marin's the extrovert. She is such an outgoing people person. She's wide, gets an absolute buzz from spending time with people. But she's also her mother's daughter, and her mum loves to cook and to host for others. So before guests arrive in our house, Marin's the one who's in the kitchen and in charge and is busily getting things ready. But as soon as the guests arrive, it's like the kitchen ceases to exist. Kitchen? What kitchen? She's all about the people at that point. And so she'll lose herself in conversation with them, which is great, except the dinner, that pork roast that we've got in there, is going to burn and be inedible if I didn't lead into my personality at that point and then finish things off in the kitchen. Because where Marin's all about people, I default to task. And so the people come and she's distracted and I'll finish it off in the kitchen. So if you look on the handout, there's a number of basic continuums to give you a very unscientific analysis of your personality. For Marin, she's on the outgoing side where I'm reserved. She defaults more to people, I go to tasks. And so our personalities shape the way that we naturally serve. I do want to give a warning here though, to say just because you end up as this in a certain personality profile doesn't mean that you can't still do that. For instance, as I said, I default to tasks over relationship. I'll happily do the dishes at a family event rather than talk to people, which is maybe more about my family than about me, but that's a different sermon, I think. But just because that's the way that my personality is naturally inclined, it doesn't mean that I don't have to or that I shouldn't talk to people. It may not come as naturally to me, it might drain me more, I might be a bit clunky at it, but I still need to do it. So it's not then that there's a wrong or a right personality, but rather to be aware of how our personalities affect where and how we can most comfortably serve. The last aspect of our shape then are our experiences that we've had. Our experiences shape and define us and lead us down certain paths of service. There are many people, for instance, who go into jobs like counselling or social work because of their own experiences of growing up in an environment of abuse or addiction or similar. And as terrible as these experiences may be for them, they then give these people particular empathy and insight to go into such roles. But it's not just negative or painful experiences, positive life experiences shape us too. As a young adult, I did a number of week-long camps where we were caring for teenagers and young adults with physical disabilities. And this experience has made me much more comfortable interacting with people with disabilities. I'm not saying I'm amazing at it, but my experience gives me a familiarity and a greater ease to do so than for other people. So again, on your handout, there's space to reflect on defining positive experiences and achievements, as well as to note defining painful experiences. But as you take time to at least start identifying some of your experiences, you begin to see where and how they might feed into you and how you might serve. So we've got these 5 things: our spiritual gifts, our heart, our abilities, our personality, and our experiences. And they are all pieces of the puzzle that make up our shape. They give us direction and insight as to where and how we are to serve. But it's not as simple or as clear-cut as simply saying, I have a teaching gift, therefore I should preach. Let me give you two examples of how these things come together for me and my wife. Sorry, I'll put them back up. For me, one of my gifts is teaching. Hence why I'm here today doing this. My heart is to see people grow in following Jesus. And I also have a heart, and this is a more recent realization, I have a heart for connecting people, not in a networking, grow your business kind of a way, but in a, I found a place that I can belong to kind of a way. So, gifts, teaching, heart, to see people grow and to connect. I have a diverse range of abilities, of which handyman skills are not one of them, but some of the common threads that people have identified in me are that I'm a social glue that helps hold people together. I'm a good listener, and I have good skills in facilitating groups. As an aspect of my personality, as I've already said, I'm an introvert. So some of what that means is being more of an observer in social situations, and also, on the flip side of that, of desiring deep conversations around meaningful topics with people. And in terms of experiences, well, at a surface level, there's things like my experience as a social worker, which I did for 10 years before becoming a pastor, where I ran various groups and programs and worked a lot with a lot of different people in lots of different ways. But when I go a bit deeper, there's also an experience of being pretty lonely as a child, without many friends around me. So these are some of the pieces of my puzzle. And when I put it together, one expression of my shape is that I serve by leading a small group Bible study. I have a small group that's always open to new people, that has a diverse mix of ages, stages, genders, relationship status, ethnic background, and just about anything else you could identify. Many of them have been at our church less than 18 months. And we just love being together and love getting into the Word and love considering how it applies for us for us to follow Jesus together. So that's me. But let me tell you then about my wife, Maren. One of her gifts is discernment. She is very insightful and perceptive. Sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a challenge to live with. Her heart is always for people, and despite the fact that it can be draining for her at times, she has a particular heart for the hurting and the wounded and the vulnerable. One of her abilities that she's fantastic at is she's a great singer. She sings really well. Her personality is extroverted, and some key experiences in her life are being bullied and excluded, and feeling like she didn't really have people who cared about her and her difficult experiences. So when you look at her pieces of the puzzle and you put it together, one way it looks for her is that when she sings at church and she's on a stage like this, she will scan the congregation as she does so, and she's able to discern if someone is struggling. Even if they're singing along, even if there's a smile on their face, she'll know that there's something more going on below the surface. And that will then prompt her to seek that person out after church is finished or through the week to check in on them with how they're going and to give them the space to share. So what are some of the ways in which you could see your shape coming together? Where might you see your unique combination of gifts and heart and abilities, of your personality and experiences, suggesting that maybe this might be an avenue for you to serve in? And don't limit your thinking to just church and what happens in this building. Don't limit your thinking just to the formalized, recognized ministries that are a part of Corowa Baptist. Because so much of our service actually goes unnamed, like what Maren does, and just comes from the expression of our life with Jesus. And another question would be, is who else could you speak to? A pastor, a youth leader, a mentor, for some other input and direction. They might have insight into you that you're not aware of, or knowledge about ministry and opportunities that you don't know about. The call for us, though, is that we would put that we would be the servants that God has called us to be, that we would follow Jesus, who himself came to serve and be like him as we do so. So I hope then this morning has been helpful. And I hope it's given you some direction as you try to figure out where it might be that God is calling you to serve. But as we finish up, Paul writes to the Ephesians that the gifts that we are given are ultimately so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. This is actually huge. This is why serving, rather than just sitting and receiving, is so important in the life of the church. Because as we do so, it's actually helping all of us to become more like Jesus, which is what it's all about. So let me pray for you, and then I'm done, and I think we'll sing. So God, we thank you that you are the God that you are, who not only pours out your grace on us in such a way that we are saved, and we thank you so much for that, but you pour grace upon us. You give us gifts that you intend for us to use to serve you and to serve your people. You've given us passions and desires in our hearts. You've gifted us with abilities and opportunities to grow and develop skills. You've given us unique personalities and experiences throughout our lives that shape us and make us the people who we are today. And in all of that, God, you just bless us again and again abundantly with grace upon grace. And so I pray, God, that we as your people, wherever we are, whatever phase we're in or whatever it might be, that we would be faithful to your call on us to be like you and to be a servant and to do our part to help each other to grow and to become more like you. Our desire, God, is that we would grow up in our faith, becoming mature, attaining to the fullness of the likeness of Christ. And so may we be faithful to do our part, the part that you have shaped us for. Lead and guide us as we reflect on our lives and who you've made us to be. Help us in conversations with others to have insight as to what it looks like for us to put the puzzle together. And may we just be responsive to the opportunities that you bring before us, responsive to the needs, and responsive to your call above all. We pray this, that we would be like your Son, Jesus. In his name, amen.